As the title of the video suggests, my name is Dave. You might recognize me from such streams as Don't Be So Meano to Me, P Zombieland, and The Horror of It All. At the moment, I'm a student. I'm currently doing an undergraduate degree, a BSc in computer science with a focus on software, and I've just finished the first year of the degree. I'm also working towards getting a PhD in philosophy. Both of these are things that I've always dreamed of getting, and I'm lucky enough to have a really supportive partner who not only encourages me to achieve these things, but is also helping to support me while I do. I'm a very lucky guy. I already have a couple of other degrees. My first degree is a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and Psychology through the very amazing Open University. My main focus was on the philosophy part of the degree, though I did really enjoy the psychology side as well. I think psychology plays an important part of understanding many of the things that philosophy discusses with regards to things like beliefs and philosophy of mind. And there is just lots that is interesting in psychology itself. I also have a master's degree in philosophy, again through the Open University, and this was another thing that I had always dreamed of getting. And one of the things I am most proud of, as I managed to finish it with an overall distinction. Something I was just as surprised about as anybody else who has ever spoken to me or seen me. My first article for Answers in Reason went live on the 12th of January 2016. It was just as I started level 3 of my BA in Philosophy and Psychology. I'd been involved in a group called Debate Faith on Facebook for a few years as a way of getting involved in philosophical discussions, as well as a way of honing my arguments and argument styles. One of the founding members of AIR, Alan Whistler, was also in the group. We chatted a lot and became friends through our discussions. After AIR had been started, Alan approached me and asked if I wanted to write for the site, so I said I would. Obviously, I felt quite honored just to be asked to do it. There were several reasons that I decided to start. The first was, like I say, I just felt honored that someone whose thinking I respected felt that I was good enough to contribute. Another reason is that I was starting the level 3 of my degree. I felt that writing for the site would be good practice for the essays that I would be writing for the degree. As many books discussing writing essays will tell you, the best way to improve your writing is to write. I also thought it would also help me to better understand the topics I was learning if I was to write about them outside of just the assignments being given to me as part of the degree. It also meant that I could write about subjects and ideas that weren't part of the degree, and that I was interested in discussing. Plus, as an undergrad, I was looking for an easy way to get some of my work out there in the hopes that people would see it and read it, and hopefully find some interest in it or use it. One of the final reasons that I wanted to start, there were a lot of arguments in the debate groups on Facebook that came from atheists that I found bad, or just very misinformed. However, as is part and parcel of the discussion and debate on Facebook, trying to explain these things inevitably led to dogpiling and being shouted down by other atheists. This way, I could at least form the argument and discuss what I thought were misconceptions and errors without being shouted down and derailed. I could then simply link the articles for those that were interested in actually hearing what I had to say. Okay, that's a very interesting question. I have many different outlooks from when I started with Answers in Reason. I think it would be a pretty terrible indictment of my ability to study and to think critically if all my views and outlooks were the same as they were over half a decade ago, or even just 6 months ago. Everybody's views should constantly be evolving, especially as they are introduced to new information and new ideas. If somebody is introduced to new views and new ideas, then these should at least influence how that person thinks. Even if they don't agree with or adopt those new views and new ideas, they should at least influence their current ideas to some degree, especially if they want to consider themselves critical thinkers. Okay, that's another really good question. My main goals are to just have interesting and enjoyable discussions with people I consider friends, and to meet new people who enjoy the same kinds of discussion. Of course, it does go slightly further than that as well. I also hope to encourage people to think about things a little bit differently. There are a lot of misinformed discussions that go on within the atheist community, and I hope we can encourage them to look at these things a little bit differently. There are a lot of simplistic views that are adopted simply because they're popular, and when challenged, they don't actually go on to question what they think, but instead simply dismiss those challenges to their thinking. It doesn't really make for good skepticism or good critical thinking. Both things are things that I think are important, and I hope we can encourage more of it within the atheist community, and perhaps even beyond it. I mean, it's one of the big things in the atheist community, the promotion of good skepticism and good critical thinking. Another thing I hope to achieve is to show the broader atheist community that philosophy actually is important, rather than outdated, as is often claimed. There's a lot in philosophy that is related to a lot of what is discussed within the atheist community and important to the arguments that they make. However, it's become common and popular among atheists to simply dismiss philosophy as useless and outdated, which is something that I think a lot of atheists should reconsider. And I hope we can be involved in helping them to reconsider that idea. Okay, that's kind of a tough question. This might sound like a bit of a cop out, but I actually kind of enjoy discussing pretty much every topic and can't really think of one that I don't really like. I can think of plenty that I'm not very well informed on, which kind of feeds into why I enjoy having the discussion. If I really had to state a few, though, I would go with topics surrounding ethics, epistemology, aesthetics, the philosophy of science, and of course discussions about atheism and the philosophy of religion. Oh, and films. I think epistemology, ethics, and the philosophy of religion is fascinating, and also topics that I think are important when it comes to discussions around theism, and that much of the discussion in the atheist community misunderstands many of these things. And discussion on any topic where I can learn something or improve what understanding I already have is also one of my favorite topics to discuss. Okay, this one's not quite as difficult. Some of my least favorite topics to discuss are the claim that rocks and babies are atheist, and the discussion about there only being one definition of atheism. These kind of crop up a bit too often, and they're very rarely ever fruitful. I think there is good discussion to be had about how we should approach defining atheism. I think that's quite an interesting discussion in and of itself, but the discussions about it are rarely ever good discussions. It's the same with the rocks and babies are atheist topic. There's far too many people with their heels dug in to make the discussion enjoyable and productive. And those are my least favorite kind of discussions, the ones that aren't enjoyable and aren't productive. Oddly enough, one of them is philosophy. I know, that one will probably come as a huge surprise to most of you. I'm also a big fan of films, and as you probably heard me mention on the streams a lot of times, I'm a huge fan of horror films. I don't get a lot of time to watch them normally. Usually I watch them last thing at night, just after we get in bed. Though there's a lot of times we'll watch a film downstairs or go to the cinema when there's a film that we both want to see. I'm also a big fan of gaming, especially retro gaming. I've been around since Space Invaders, Pac-Man and Donkey Kong hit the arcades, so I've got a lot of nostalgia surrounding the games of that era, as well as consoles like the Mega Drive, the SNES, the Saturn, N64, PS1 and that kind of thing. I've got a handheld that lets me play most retro games called the RG351P. Though I do enjoy lots of modern games too, of course. I just unfortunately don't get a lot of chance to play them. Although, with 4 months off now, I might get a bit more time to actually do some gaming. When it comes to music, I do enjoy it. I've got a wide variety of tastes. I listen to anything that just makes me feel like I enjoy it. From 60s music to punk and oi, to metal and thrash, to just good pop music. It's all good, as long as I enjoy it. I used to go to a lot of raves, do a lot of clubbing, though I'm a bit of an old man now and don't really do that anymore. But they were definitely good times, at least as far as I can remember. I also like to spend my time relaxing with my partner and our little dogget. It's one of the things that makes me truly happy. I'm more of a dog person than I am a cat person. I don't mind cats, don't get me wrong. And our dog has some very cat-like traits. He likes to bully us and will only accept attention when it suits him. But I generally prefer dogs. Okay, that's kind of a tough question, and a huge question. I feel like there's a lot of positives that come with the atheist community, and especially from some of the things that are promoted from within it. So let's start with what I think are some of the positives. The first positive is the promotion of the idea of critical thinking. It's an important skill and idea, and one that most definitely should be promoted and adopted by society. Learning how to think rather than what to think is something that's important for everyone. It's a skill that should be taught starting in middle school rather than something that comes with college and university. Another positive is the promotion of science and the promotion of the acceptance of science. If there's one thing that the current pandemic has taught us, besides that the saying avoid it like the plague is meaningless when it comes to humans today, it's that we still have a long way to go when it comes to people accepting and trusting science. So the fact that science promotion and science communication is big and popular in the atheist community is a positive thing. We ought to be promoting trust and acceptance in science. It's a huge benefit to humanity and to the way we live our lives. Those that promote excess distrust towards science are causing harm, not only to us as individuals, but to society as a whole. There's also the normalization of atheism. As can be seen by figures that come out of surveys in the USA, there's still a lot of mistrust and bias towards people that both do not believe in God or believe that God does not exist. And this is nothing compared to how those who do not believe in God or believe that God does not exist are treated in places like Islamic countries. It kind of goes to show just how much work is still necessary when it comes to atheism. So the work that goes into normalizing atheism and normalizing the idea of not believing in God or believing God does not exist is hugely important. We still have a long way to go until the entire world is like Europe with regards to how atheism is seen. So, as far as I can see, this is not only a positive of the atheist community, but a necessary and important function of the atheist community. There's also the ability for the atheist community to offer help and support to those that are finding themselves falling out of religion or losing their faith. More importantly, there's also the ability for the atheist community to build a network for those that have been rejected by their community and family and friends simply because they've left their faith. We often hear stories of people who are completely ostracized from their community and from their family, often being kicked out of their homes simply for non-belief. We also hear stories of people afraid to express their non-belief because of the fear of the consequences that could come from it. Positive of the atheist community is that it has the ability to form support networks and charities to help those suffering from these kinds of consequences, and to offer substantial and real help for people like this. Finally, the atheist community also has the ability to show that we do not need God or religion to be good people, not just at the level of the individual, but at the level of entire societies. It has to start at the level of individuals, of course. Everything has to build from a foundation. Showing that we as individuals can be as good as, if not better than what most religious people believe we can be is important. However, it's also important to show that, like religion, there's a moral foundation to be built upon from secular morality, and that we can ground morality without God. as well as building an accepting community and society. The atheist community can allow us to show that all of the things that atheists are mistrusted for are kind of baseless. And it's only through displaying an example that those prejudices can be shown to be exactly that, prejudices. Okay, so I guess we kind of have to move on to the negatives. One of the main negatives I see is that while all the positives of the atheist community above exist, most of them are kind of ignored by atheists writ large. Okay. It probably seems like a bit of an overbroad statement, so I'll clarify a little. Let's take the example of the promotion of critical thinking within the atheist and skeptic community first. We often hear people talk about being critical thinkers, and speaking of how critical thinking should be promoted and taught in schools. There's a lot of that kind of discussion that goes on within the atheist and skeptic community. We find many Twitter bios proudly proclaiming the person behind the account is a critical thinker. Yet, we often see sloppy thinking from within the atheist and skeptic community as well, and from a large amount of atheists and skeptics. Not only do we see that kind of sloppy thinking, but we also see many come to the defense of that same sloppy thinking. There's also a large amount of unquestioned and unquestionable thoughts that come from within the atheist and skeptic community, especially when it comes to larger names within the community. Views that go against the commonly held ones that are propagated by atheists and skeptics, they're generally shouted down and dismissed, and those that put them forward are told that they don't know what they're talking about, regardless of, whether they're qualified to talk about these things. There seems to be a large amount of people in the community that think that simply becoming an atheist or skeptic, or putting critical thinker or skeptic in their bio, makes them one by default, with few actually going out and learning about these topics. There's also problems with tribalism, problems with bullying, problems with defending popular figures, and more like that. There's also plenty of negatives that could be mentioned and discussed, but I think many of them could be sorted out if what I just mentioned was worked on and discussed among skeptics and atheists. We should be focusing on the positives in the atheist community while also working on the negatives. Improving the skepticism and criticism of all involved can help with that, and it should be the first and foremost thing on our minds. Atheists shouldn't just be arguing with theists. There should be debates and discussions going on between atheists, discussing various topics and various ideas, and various worldviews from different atheists. I'm biased here, of course, but I would like to see more discussion centered around philosophy from other atheists. Not necessarily all elements of philosophy, of course. But I'd like to see more discussion centered around epistemology, ethics, philosophy of science, that kind of thing. There's a lot of terrible understandings of topics covered in epistemology by atheists that I come across. And also very little attempt to actually understand them. For instance, there are bad understanding of things like beliefs, the burden of proof, rationality, logic, skepticism, that kind of thing. So I'd really like to see more conversations going on about these topics, and conversations that are informed rather than opinionated. Another topic of discussion I'd like to see more are those centered around reconstruction after deconversion. There are often talks centered around convincing people why they shouldn't believe, why religion is problematic, the use of things like street epistemology to break down bad beliefs, that kind of thing. However, there's little discussion that goes on about how to build better beliefs, how to build better skepticism, where to look for information, those kind of topics. So yeah, I'd really like to see more discussion centered around those. Other discussions I'd like to see more atheists having are discussions among themselves, like I just mentioned. There should be a discussion of world views going on between atheists, just discussing why various atheists believe various things, centered around like ethics and, like I say, epistemology and skepticism. It shouldn't just be discussions with theists and arguments with theists. It should be going on amongst ourselves as well. Okay, so where do I start with this one? There are plenty of people that I find are overrated in the community. Some just in general, and some for certain aspects. Like, if we consider someone like Aaron Ra, there can be no doubts whatsoever that when it comes to evolution, biology, etc., he is more than worthy of praise, as are his efforts in combating creationism in school and furthering secularism. However, he has several really bad takes about philosophy and philosophical topics. And unfortunately, his views on those are taken very seriously by many atheists. And that makes him overrated in those areas. The same can be said of many of the bigger names in the YouTube community. Popularity and likability in many cases seem to have become conflated with knowledgeability, sadly. There are several that I can think of that are underrated, and I really wish that more atheists would pay attention to them and listen to them. First and foremost is Graham Oppy, of course. While his work can often be difficult to read for the uninitiated, he has several that are easy to read and really helpful. And he's one of the brightest minds of our time when it comes to philosophy of religion and the promotion of atheism. There are also other great channels like Real Atheology, Counter-Apologetics, Emerson Green, and people on Twitter like Real Atheology, Ben Watkins, Counter-Apologetics, Emerson Green, and a bunch of names like that. They all contribute great arguments, and they're all incredibly knowledgeable on these topics. I've got so much respect for these people. They really need to be better known and paid attention to more when it comes to people in the atheist community. Yep, of course I have. As soon as I was allocated a slot, I jumped at the chance of getting the vaccinations. I think they're important. They're not just for us, but for society as a whole. I mean, if we care about other people and care about ourselves, then the vaccinations are the way to go. They went pretty well. I had the Pfizer vaccine. The first dose made me a little sleepy during the evening, and the second dose gave me mild cold-like symptoms for a day, but that was about it, really. Okay, so this one's actually kind of a difficult question too, mostly because I've been gaming for a very long time, like since the 1980s. Some games I can think of are Golden Axe, Rolling Thunder, Double Dragon, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Zork, Leisure Suit Larry, Pinball Dreams, Pinball Illusions, Fallout 3, and Fallout New Vegas, the XCOM series, Civilization series, Road Rash 1 and 2, International Karate Plus, Karate Champ, Street Fighter 2, Ms. Pac-Man, Plants vs. Zombies, Arkanoid, Outrun, Sega Rally, Rocket Knight Adventures, Elite, and probably loads that most people have never even heard of. To be clear, I've owned a Commodore 64, an Atari ST, an Amiga, a NES, a SNES, a Mega Drive, a Sega Saturn, a Sony PlayStation, a Nintendo 64, a Dreamcast, a GameCube, an Xbox 360, and a PC. And I've also frequented many, many arcades in my time. So yeah, I've played a lot of video games. So yeah, that about wraps up my Meet the AiRheads segment. I hope you've learned a little bit about me. I hope I haven't bored you too much and maybe said one or two things you might find interesting. I'm always open to discussion with other people, of course. If you want to have a discussion with me, just hit me up on Twitter. I'm TrolleyDave1971 on Twitter. You can reach me on the Answers in Reason Discord or the Answers in Reason Facebook group. As long as you're wanting a discussion, I'm always happy to do it. And as long as it's a cordial discussion, I'm not really one for having arguments and fights over the internet. It gets kind of boring. So, yeah, thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you soon, hopefully. Oh, before I do, I just want to do some showing off.
Oh, yeah. Look at that. Master of Arts in Philosophy with distinction. Yeah. You like that.
Yeah, I
He's
do
got
like
it.
that.
You don't.